My name is Ensiyah, and you're watching Social Chai with Ensiyah.
Right. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Hello. Back to another episode of Social Chai. Today, the topic is marriage culture in Pakistan. I'm going to be having the beautiful, amazing Fatima Chukhtai joining me. Hey, Fatima.
Hi.
How are you?
Hi. I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. Can you give us a little bit of a background or just tell us about yourself for the people who might not know you?
Okay, so I go by fs.jukhtai on Instagram. Do I need to tell them what I do?
Yeah, go for it. Just a little bit of your background, what you've
Okay, so
studied, what you're doing.
currently I'm a law student and I'm in my second year. Just got done with exams, so pretty happy about that. Other than that, not really much interesting going on.
Okay. So we're here to talk about marriage culture.
Yes.
I feel like this is a topic that is very near and dear to our hearts because we're supposedly of age or even like past it. I don't know, according to Pakistani standards. I don't know. Today's going to be a little more lighthearted than we normally do our shows, and it's going to be more experience based than it is informative. So just setting everyone up. So let's start talking about, superficial and fiscal requirements when it comes to marriage in Pakistan. What are some requirements that you've seen or experienced or heard about?
I mean, probably the main ones that I feel like everyone sort of heard at some point or like it's happened to someone is like height, weight, and like the way you look, basically. Because usually that's not something that someone can control, but they're kind of just like, that's the basis that they reject you on, whether they're just like, oh, you're too short, or you're too fat, or you're too dark, which I think puts a lot of unnecessary pressure on not just women, but also men, because they also get really
Mm-hmm.
self-conscious, like, I don't look like the ideal man. So I think that's
Right.
some of the few.
Right, I definitely agree. There's like a lot of pressure on outer appearance, and especially for things like I feel like weight again, height, weight,
Mm-hmm.
things that those can be preferences, and even to a certain extent, color can be a preference. But then it's like so culturally influenced because of colonization and things like that, and there really is no control over a thing like color. And the
Exactly.
fact that people get rejected off of those bases, it almost seems like a meritocratic process like marriage, like you need to have these things or
Yeah.
like you won't get accepted. Another thing that I think is also a requirement is like fiscal requirements in terms of money. So yeah, so for example, how much dowry can this said person say? Like, does their family come from a wealthy background? Other than that, for the guy, like, what kind of job he has, if he has foreign citizenship, that's an added plus. So I think
Mm.
there's definitely like other things when it comes to superficial and fiscal requirements too, because personally, I've definitely heard like when, said, unsaid, like, quote unquote, Ristantis are talking, they talk a lot about, oh, that guy has like an American citizenship, Canadian citizenship, or we want that guy because he has an American citizenship,
Yeah.
or like said girl is going to give us are going to furnish the house and are going to get us a house and things like that. So it's really ludicrous and like
Yeah.
ridiculous to hear about things like that, but that is a reality for a lot of people, majority of people. So we talked about the superficial and fiscal requirements. And by the way, this episode was inspired by Indian matchmaking. So I thought it was very important to talk about these things before we get to the more serious topics.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the second thing is forced marriages. We're going to be talking about forced marriages. That is also something we see a lot in Pakistan. Do you maybe want to talk about it a little bit?
I mean, again, like I feel like everyone just knows like an instance where it's happened to someone. Like it could be like your neighbor or like someone in your family. And usually the reasons are just I don't know, they're just, oh, it's time, it's your age now. And also a lot of it has to do, like, I'm speaking about this in terms of maybe more strictly like the interior culture that's not, I would say they're not as highly educated, and marriage is like something you have to do. I mean, it is like that even in our like educated
Mm-hmm.
Pakistanis, I
Yeah.
guess. But
Yeah.
there, it's more like your entire purpose of life is to get married at some point, and if you don't, then
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like you've completely failed. And that's
Right.
where I think the forced marriage thing comes in, where the kid doesn't really want to get into the marriage, but since it's expected of them, and it's something that could, bring dishonor on their family if they don't get married, usually they end up getting into marriages that they don't want to be a part of. It could be either because of their family. A lot of families get into marriages with people that they are also related to, so they can, like, keep the bloodline pure or something. There's a lot of that. Other than that, like, a lot of, you've seen, I don't know if you've seen it recently, but this girl, she was forced into a marriage and she ended up killing the guy because she was like, it's my right
Wow.
to marry who I want. You are not going to tell me what to do.
That's
And I mean,
crazy.
that's a one-off thing, right? But usually what
Right.
happens is that someone who's gotten into a marriage like that, they kind of just have to stay. They kind of just have to deal with it. And they don't
Right.
really have a choice. They can't really talk to anyone about it because, again, like, the whole dishonor upon the family thing comes in, where
Right.
if you can't make a marriage work, then, like, there's something wrong with you, rather than thinking, hey, maybe it's not the best match. Maybe this marriage wasn't the best idea. It's just not something that crosses people's minds that easily.
Right. I think you touched on like some very important things that I just want to like go over, like regional disparities. First of all, I feel like that's something we don't talk about, because personally I feel like we lived in very, where you and I were like, to a certain degree we're very privileged, to the point that I believe that
Yeah,
our
for
parents
sure,
wouldn't
for sure.
coerce us to get married, but regional disparities when it comes to, first of all, following laws. And in Pakistan, if you'll see something, it's that culture norms often supersede legal laws,
Yeah.
and the government's okay with it because usually, provinces and like regions like that have certain power and authority over the government in terms of, public opinion. So
Mm-hmm.
you see that a lot, regional disparity. Marriages, more than just like, a communion of two people, are exchanges between tribes for like certain things, and that's still
Yeah.
continued, that culture. Or like you said, to maintain the bloodline, or even not the bloodline, to preserve a certain culture, because preservation is very important when it comes to, tribes and regions, like, sorry, small tribes and minorities in the area, because there's the fear of getting wiped out, or if like something, an outsider or an unknown or a said alien comes into your culture, they're going to somehow destroy your culture, or, westernize it, or
Yeah.
whatever, things like that. Another thing you talked about is consent, which I think is really important. And we see the mention of consent more often, whether it comes to sexual relationships, whether it be marriage, normal things like that. And that, I think, it's very conflicting, and like I contemplate over the topic all the time, because if you look at coercion, and especially when it comes to consent, it's something that is clearly explicitly laid out in Islam as well as our law of Pakistan, where like said person cannot be coerced or forced into marriage, and if said person does not give consent to getting married, you can't marry them off, um
Yeah.
which is just it's so ridiculous to me that like you pride yourself on, being great Muslims and following all of these Muslim practices, but then you don't follow the scripture. So that's a bit comical to me. But yeah, consent is really important, and a lot of people aren't given that. And then you talked about dishonor. Is that right? I think
Yeah.
another thing with is that I think you maybe thought of when you were talking about it too, was honor killings, right? So is something that is very important, in not only in tribal culture, I would say generally, even like, when you associate with a certain I don't know, certain what would you call being Punjabi, or like when you like, you know, associate with a certain identity, when you're
Province,
Punjabi,
like a, I don't know.
provincial identity, I don't
I
know. But
guess.
when you associate with a certain identity like Punjabi or Sindhi, you know, that's even stronger there. Like this thing of like, you know, protecting your honor, protecting your izzat. And women
Yeah.
often get married, not only married off in like non-consensual relationships, but get married off faster to
Yeah.
protect their
Yeah.
izzat. Which again is a ludicrous concept to me, because it's like, shouldn't we have reformations and the other like provisions in place to protect their izzat, rather than just signing a contract and becoming married being the only like go-to, you know, alternative.
Yeah.
um but yeah, I think those are very, very important things. Yeah, so let's get into I also want to talk about child marriages, and then after child marriages, let's talk about like family law a little bit, and how, like, you know, how legal things are in place to prevent these things, but they still prevail. So can you
Mhm.
maybe talk to us a little bit about child marriages in Pakistan?
Ooh, that's a really heavy topic because like every time I think about it, it just gives me chills. Because if you've
Right.
ever seen like a video or just heard anything, it's honestly heartbreaking because usually the kid has no idea what's happening. They have no idea what's gonna happen to them as a result of what's, the marriage. And they're usually so young where it's like, you kind of imagine that, dude, if I was like 8 and I had gotten married, like I
Right.
honestly wouldn't know what's going on. What's marriage? Like,
Hmm.
wouldn't clue. But it's like these girls not only are put like forced to get married, they end up having kids, and it's like this is a child taking care of children. It just doesn't make sense to me in my head, because how are you supposed to raise a child and like make sure that maybe their lives are better than yours or different, or just provide anything when you're a literal child? And I think that's kind of the point of a child marriage, where they don't want the girl to have any say or any power because she's so young. And it
Hmm.
creates like this dynamic that the kid knows that they're a kid, and they know that they don't have a say in these things, and they don't know about a lot of things because they usually don't have the exposure. They're usually pulled out of school at this point. They can't go to school anymore, and it's honestly terrifying. And a lot of the times, well, not a lot, but in certain cases, there's like this thing where if between like two families, if like something has happened, so like to make up for it, you give us one of your girls. Like, I don't know
Right.
exactly what it's called, but it is
Right.
like a pretty huge thing that is happening in
Hmm.
Pakistan. And
It's
it's
called Sawada. So it's like to
okay.
settle
Okay.
disputes. They exchange.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. And
yeah,
that's terrifying because, I
it
mean,
is.
it's a child. Like, they're usually extremely young. And I remember very recently there was this whole sort of debate where I'm not sure which court said this, but one of the courts said that as soon as a girl has her first period, she's old enough to get married, which,
Mm.
in my opinion, is insane.
Yeah, so I think we should also make a distinction here for people who might not know. So in Pakistan,
Okay.
yeah, we have a federal court of law, but there's also tribal courts in place, that, you know, rural and
Yeah.
tribal courts in place that give off these like, you know, rulings or whatever. But we do have a federal court of law. We're not barbaric or archaic.
Yeah.
We're not living in those times. We do have these
The whole
rules in
thing,
place,
yes.
but people don't follow
Yeah.
it. So just putting that out there for people who might not know, it wasn't
Yeah.
the federal court who probably said that. It was probably the
Yes.
tribal court
Yes.
that put it out there.
It wasn't the
But yeah,
Supreme
go on.
Court or anyone.
Yeah,
The Supreme
yeah,
Court was like, no, we're not going to do that. Don't say that. And they
yeah,
corrected that. But the fact that
yeah.
these people, I mean, normally to get into the judicial system, you need to be you have to have a certain level of education. So to see that a statement like this is coming from people like that is concerning,
Mm-hmm.
because you shouldn't expect it from anyone, and especially not from a court, because a lot of people can use that in the wrong way, even if like down the line it has been like retracted and like it's not hard set rule or anything, but people are still going to use it against children. They're going to be like, your
Right.
kid is old enough, it's time, you know? And there's, I mean, I personally was like 8 years old when I got my first period. So like imagine that happening and then someone just being like, oh, time for you to get married. I'm in like fourth grade.
Right, right.
You
Something
know?
that, yeah, something really important that you talked about, that I think is very important to mention also to note is that these children, even though they might be aware of the fact that they're entering a marriage, and you said that they don't have a lot of say, even if the marriage is consensual, in the sense where the said girl or guy, usually a girl, because there is a blatant disparity here, right?
Yeah.
Says yes to the marriage, you need to realize the pressure from above, and you need to realize that this person doesn't, in the culture or in the norm that they live in, they don't see another alternative. They don't see the possibility of saying no because they know the consequences of
Yeah.
saying no. So it might not always be like someone killing you or honor killing, but there's very brutal consequences. Like, there's excommunication from said society, your parents disowning you. So there's a lot of things like that. So you need to
Yeah.
understand that saying no is
Not
sometimes
an
not an
option.
alternative.
Yeah.
Something somebody asked right now over here, does the Watta Satta system still exist in Pakistan? Actually, that ties to the point made by you, Fatma. There's Swara, there's also Watta Satta, which is basically bartering for brides. So you exchange brides between like tribes or groups or things like that. And there's also
Okay.
this thing called Petliki, where essentially, you marry off a girl even before she's born or when she's just a newborn baby. So you say,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
aapki, hamari beti aapki, like that kind of situation. So like there is no choice in that situation whatsoever. I also wanted to give some stats out. So 1% of girls in Pakistan are married before their 18th birthday, and 3% are married before the age of 15. So we have around 1.9 million child brides in Pakistan at the moment. And we usually see this in rural areas and Gilgit, Baltistan. And according to UNICEF stat, if we did take preventative measures or like, really crack down on child marriages, which Pakistan says it's allegedly doing and wants to like completely finish child marriages by 2030, we would have a $6,229 million increase in earnings and productivity in our government, right? I mean, in our country. And this is one of the things that really, really angers me, whether it comes to gender, like, gender equality, whether it's, this whole marriage thing. Gender disparity is stopping the country from economic growth, right? And all a country wants is to thrive and for its people to thrive, and letting this said gender segment, a very major segment of your country thrive, is only beneficial for your country. So I don't understand why we don't do that. And again, I don't want to blame everything on the patriarchy, but it really is the patriarchy. Like, why can't we just,
It
all
is.
thrive together? But yeah, so those are the stats on child marriages and some of the reasons for child marriages. I'm sorry, I'm looking at my notes.
It's okay.
But yeah, so we talked about traditional customs. Traditional customs are really, really strong. And one of the reasons, I would personally say, another reason is it's because of the weak governance as well. Because we've othered provinces and tribes so much and taken them away from, the mainstream Pakistan.
Yeah.
I feel like there's more pressure on people to preserve their cultures and really be strict about, said traditional customs. So that's also on part of the government, honestly. Then there's gender norms, patriarchal norms, that, drive child marriages, where you see differences of 15 years, 20 years between the groom and, said wife. There is family practices. So 34% of married 16 to 7-year-old girls are married to a first cousin on their father's side. And marriage among families is apparently known as adobado. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing these things wrong. And then there's a thing you said about religion, that apparently if a girl, once they reach puberty, they're just ready to get married, and you need to protect their set izzat because it can be robbed. And then there's level of education. Like I was watching, this was an Indian documentary on Vice, but I think it also applies to Pakistan since our cultures are so similar. It was talking about how like a girl was saying, जब हम लोग like school में अच्छी पढ़ाई नहीं करते या फिर we start lacking in school, our parents are just like, let's marry her off. You know, there's like, yeah, it's crazy to me. And the thing is that even in the circles we traveled in, I remember girls particularly who were like, oh, we can't study, like we don't want to do this, so we're just going to get married. I'm not saying that marriage as an institution is bad. There's definitely advantages to it, but I don't think it should be seen as the only alternative, you know, when all like if, why is marriage plan B, right? But yeah, so that was a little bit about child marriages. Now, Fatima, you're in your second year of law, right?
Yes.
And we're gonna start talking about family law,
Okay.
and which is pertinent to women or marriages. So you can talk about, you know, about marriage as a communion when the getting together, and also about the dissolution of marriages, divorce, and things like that. It's all you now. Go for
Okay,
it.
so I haven't studied it yet as a subject, just gonna
Right.
put that out there, but I have read
Right.
about it.
Mhm.
So I think one of the main problems that we come across in family law is usually where the woman, well, I wouldn't call it a problem, I think it's a good thing, where the woman usually finds out later on that she had a certain right that was not given to her. Now, this can usually start like really, really early. A lot of people have heard about this now, where in the Nikah there's a whole page that's taken out, which is specifically for the woman. And of course, it's the only page that's taken out. Other than that, even when it comes to divorce or the woman saying that she wants to have, for example, like a part in property, like the husband and wife are planning on getting a house together. For some people, it's not even a question that the woman is even going to get to have a part, even if she has made any financial like contributions or anything. Most of the time, it's going to be like the guy's property, just because, you know, patriarchal norms. Right. The man is the, you know, breadwinner, so it has to be in his name. And the problem that comes down is when it comes to divorce, she has made the financial contributions, but when it comes down to like the paperwork, it's just the guy's name there, which makes all of her hard work, all the contribution that she's done, absolutely irrelevant, because on paper it's his house. And this is something that a lot of women aren't even aware of, that they can say that no, because this is not just like a right in like legally, it is your right in Islam as well. So like anyone who wants to argue that religiously speaking you can't do this, yes you can, it's your right. You have worked for these things, you have contributed financially, you're supposed to be a team, you know. And with divorce, the biggest thing in law, even like really higher up lawyers do this, where if they approach a family law lawyer and they say, hey, you know, we want to get a divorce, it's just not working out, you know, whatever your reasons are. And usually the process is that they are going to start to convince you not to do it. Usually it goes down to, is that, you know, where are you going to go? What are you going to do? It's going to affect the kids. For the husband, he doesn't really get that talk. It's usually for the woman who has to sit through that. And even though I'm trying not to make this about gender, but it honestly really is.
No, go for it. There's the evident disparity, so go for it.
Yeah, exactly. Like when you look at the issues, this is what it is, like majorly what it is. And I don't know if you've seen this, but there's this movie on Amazon, I believe. It's called Thapar.
I've heard about it.
Where basically what happens in it, I think it encapsulates even like what happens in Pakistan really perfectly, where the husband slaps the wife, right? And everyone's like, what's the big deal? It was just one slap, you know, why are you getting a divorce over it? Her lawyers try convincing her not to do it. Her family obviously tries to convince her not to do it. And I mean, you have to watch the movie. It's amazing. And again, I feel like we have the same issues here, where I've seen it happening because I interned at a law firm. I'm not going to take any names, But
Okay.
there,
Go for
but
it.
we had a client come in who was saying that she had gotten divorced with her husband, and he ended up faking the papers. Like the papers for the house were in her name because that was like his idea of a gift, and like he was like, it's going to be our home and all that, which is nice, perfect, amazing, do that,
Yeah.
it's great. But then he ended up changing the paperwork and running off with the actual paperwork, and now she couldn't find him. And that's like one of the instances, and there
It's
were
so
so many
tragic,
cases
but
like
like it's
this.
so ridiculous. Like,
Exactly. And they're so like it will blow your mind how many cases there are where the guy like did something to the wife after a divorce maybe and just like disappeared. And obviously they're aided by like everyone in society in order to do this, because how
right,
else is he, so comfortably hiding where you can't find him at all?
right. That's
So
that's crazy. That's
yeah. And
um
again, like with legally speaking, there are reasons why it's preferred that some.
I think we're having a little bit of technical difficulty. I think Fatima is going to come back. Wait, let me just help her out. It's okay, guys. It's okay. But yeah, Fatima was talking about dissolution of marriages. Let me just ask her to rejoin. Give us a second. It is a live session, so it happens. Um, by the way, everybody, you can like leave your comments here if you have any questions, anything like that. The comment section is open to you. And ask questions, be part of the discussion, or make comments. Correct us if we're wrong about anything. But yeah, go for it. Yeah, so Fatima's talking about the dissolution of marriages, right? About divorce essentially. And we have a very, I would say, one-sided dissolutions of marriages because first of all, like Fatima talked about, when you go in for a divorce or when you go in for like set talaq, there are uh, people who will try to convince you to not get the divorce, and that's completely fine. I think that yes, there should be contemplation over the decision of divorce because it is a very big decision, destroying that communion of two individuals. But oftentimes are arranged marriages happening in North America? Yes, arranged marriages happen in North America as well, especially in the South Asian community is very prevalent. It's very similar to what we talked about before, where there's this need to protect your culture, set tribe, set clan. So in North America, South Asians tend to see themselves as, a collective group. So in order to, protect that group or like preserve that group's traditions, there's a lot of arranged marriages that happen within South Asia too. Actually, a lot of people, arranged marriages over,
Hi, sorry
set
about
love
that.
marriages. It's completely fine. It's a live session. It happens. But yeah, so arranged marriages do happen in North America as well. So yeah, you were talking about divorce and like how you tackle that in like your law firm. If you remember where you were, you can continue.
I was trying to touch upon like the age factor of marriage,
Hmm.
where basically like the reason that we legally speaking say that you should probably get married after the age of 18 is something we call mental capacity. So it's said that you don't have the mental capacity to make certain decisions before the
Right.
age of 18, which is why people under the age of 18 are called minors. And usually decisions that they're made are not legally binding, which is exactly why child marriages are just a big, big, big no no. Because even if they agree to it, legally speaking, it's argued that they don't have the mental capacity to make the decision independently because they might not be
Right.
fully aware of how a marriage works. Because we all have like this idea that it's like this whole nice little thing where you get to live with someone and have babies, and like, yeah, sure, it can be like that, but there's a lot that goes into it that
Right.
I don't think anybody under 18 at the point can like even try to like think about, and like let alone understand and accept that, yeah, I'm willing to like, you know, get myself into something like this.
Right. One thing, so someone said, I agree divorce is considered, Aisha Khader said, I agree divorce is considered as taboo in our culture,
Okay.
and mostly they prejudge already that girl must be responsible for the divorce, in my opinion. Well, yeah, actually, I want to, in unison to what you said about the nikah nama also. So yeah, so a lot of the imams who are conducting the nikah will cross out said things that are in the right of the woman, or just take the page out. And another thing that's an issue, for example, in the nikah nama, there's this blank space where the woman can put in whatever condition she wants, right?
Yeah.
And usually it's saved for, like, if like a said divorce happens or there's a divorce in the future, she has, like, she says certain things, like, for example, I want to keep this and this, or I want this and this. She has certain conditions set. But the thing is, if you contest or if you even decide to fill that part in or mention that part, it's like taken almost as like you're already thinking about divorce. You haven't even entered the marriage yet. And it's kind of like
Yeah.
you're just trying to light a fire, when it's just your right. Like, Islam grants you that prenuptial right to, like, have that. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's completely taken away. How many of these arranged marriages end up in
In
divorce?
divorce.
I am not sure about the percentage about arranged marriage divorce, but even if it's low, it's probably because of, I'm not saying arranged marriages are bad. Some arranged marriages are great. They're amazing, People really thrive in them. It's great. That's why they've continued for such a long time. But arranged marriages can also be a very sticky situation because of, family pressures and your dependency on said individual or man, especially when you have children as well. So they can be very hard to get out of too. So some people would rather just die and live like they're 50 years with a person
Yeah.
than, get the divorce. So when it comes to family law, I wanted to talk. Oh, Islam gives women the right to choose their destiny. I said, does our culture follow that?
Good.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think there's a very as we progress as a society, there's, especially as in Pakistan, I see less of Islam and more of culture, and especially I myself, as I've, like, I got an English translation of the Quran and started reading scripture myself. I noticed so many inconsistencies between, like, what I've heard growing up and what the Quran
Yeah.
actually says, and it just blows my mind. So there's a lot of cultural influence mixed. But yeah, I want to talk a little bit about history, right, of these said suppressing laws. I think in 19, let me quote this right because I don't want to get this wrong. So in 1973, there were actually the Pakistani Constitution as well as like international conventions, like the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women Act. Um, there were a lot of legal policies in place to protect women, right? When it came to marriage, when it came to other things just in general. However, in 1980s, there was an Islamization that came into place because of a man with a very bold and strong mustache, Yalha, right? And he
Yeah.
came out with these archaic hudud ordinances, and there was like an Islamization of laws where, like, women's rights were undermined, legal rights that were in place. So there's a lot of growing up from that too, because Pakistan until that point was a very much secular nation. But when that Islamization happened, some people or most people or really radical group just decided to stay with it.
Yeah.
And that group was very strong in the ideology of patriarchy. So a lot of things, even though policy or legally rights were given to women or minorities or marginalized groups, um, those those rights weren't really enacted. Those laws weren't really enforced because whenever they were try to enforce them, there was a very strong backlash from this segment of, I would call them radicals, honestly. Another thing I wanted to talk about also, you talked about family laws, right? I also know that there's a lot of laws that are actually abused and used to put women in jail if they disagree uh, to not, have the salah, or they, because a lot of women want to stay in marriages, right? So like the
Yeah.
men will be like, we're ending this marriage. I want to get a divorce, or I want to get a second wife. Let's talk about second wife, right? I want to get a second wife, and the girl is like, no, I don't want you to get a second wife. And in that situation, you would either like, divorce the said person because they're unsatisfied, or you will not get the second wife, because Islamically speaking, you need to get, agreement. Also,
Yes.
legally speaking, you also need to get
Yes.
agreement. But people just end up marrying their second wife and completely ignoring the other one. And the
Yeah.
said legal rights that that wife has, like for example, you're supposed to be given a said property, through Islamic jurisprudence and through legal jurisprudence like Pakistan jurisprudence. You're supposed to be given like equal attention. You're supposed to be given property, things like that, and all of that is ignored.
Yeah.
So it's not that there's not laws in place, because there are a lot of laws in place to protect women, and I honestly wouldn't completely blame the government either. The issue is with public opinion when you try to change those laws, especially when it comes to women. I don't know why we as a society have so many problems with women who just want to live their lives and give you babies and just chill out. But yeah, whenever it comes to women, there's halla gulla and just like a big uproar. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know why people are so threatened by women. I have no idea why, but apparently they are. Um, you can. I'm sorry, I can't. But you can give your piece if you want to comment on what I said. If I said anything wrong, anything, if you
No, I
agree with
mean, I
it.
completely agree that there are a lot of good laws in place. Like when I've been studying the law and I'm like, hey, this is a cool law. Like you can protect yourself with it. The only
Right,
issue is how it plays out in court.
right,
So the problem is that the judge who is going to make the
mhm,
decision that is going to affect the rest of your life, they're supposed to be, neutral. They're not supposed to be picking sides. They're not supposed to be affected by any like outside factors of the case other than, this is the case, that's it, just, give us your decision. They're usually, I mean, maybe this is not, it's not a secret that there's a lot of background things that happen when
mhm,
your case goes into a court. There's gonna be a lot of threatening. Your life can be a threat at times in a court. So a lot of people are scared where they're like, yeah, there is this law to protect me, but if I take it to court, what if like before the judge is even able to give me a decision, I don't live to see it. A big example of that
right,
is the recent case of blasphemy where the person was killed in court.
right,
And a lot of these things happen with marriages as well. If a girl decides to take her case to court where she's like, you know what, something wrong happened to me, the law is protecting me, and I need to make sure that I can utilize it. When you go to court, we don't really have a proper system within court itself, especially the lower courts where these cases usually end up.
right,
They're literally just criminals walking around in court, and they're just casually strolling, and like it's totally okay. And anyone can enter into a courtroom, and it's threatening, it's scary because you don't know how the people that you are going against in this case are going to retaliate, because usually they end up taking it very personally. They're like,
right,
you're bringing dishonor on the family by doing this, when honestly it's her right. And it's not just her right legally speaking, it's usually also her right in Islam.
yeah,
But for them, it's just strictly that, you're ruining our name, you're dragging it through the dirt by doing all of this. And there's a lot of just, background stuff that happens. The judge is going to be biased against a woman who comes to court. And especially if it's related to marriage, because, yeah, they're just gonna be biased. They're gonna be like, no, there's no way
Right.
that the guy did anything wrong ever. You know, even if he beat you, it's probably for your own good, which is
Right.
a whole other topic. But again, it's a huge thing that happens within marriages that we've seen.
Right. Another thing I wanted to mention is like the law that I was quoting before. So it's called the Dissolution of Muslim Marriages Act of
Okay.
1939, but it was adopted by Pakistan when it was founded. So we had this law in place, right? And it basically enables women to seek judicial divorce on different grounds, including cruelty, right? So, for example, if there's a domestic abuse situation or something like that. And khula is a very important like feature of Pakistan divorce. But the issue is while the woman is allowed to initiate divorce legally, even speaking the court, right? Because either it's societal pressure, either it's threatening your
Yeah.
life, like you talked about, or generally it's law enforcement that is in place that will just brush it off, like we talked about earlier. So you're not even
Yeah.
allowed to get to that point where you get to be in a judicial court and fight that get that right.
Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to talk about was this said because I want to talk about this in an objective sense. Yes, there's a lot of faults in Pakistan. There's other things too. For example, in 2006, the Women's Protection Act amended the Hudud ordinances, removing the most harmful aspects, such as the requirement for the testimony of four male witnesses
Oh.
to prove rape charges, right?
Yeah.
So there have been, are women who take halal looked down upon? Yes, they are looked down upon.
Yes.
Let's talk about that
Yes.
in a bit.
Yes.
But yeah, so there have been reformations within the law, but I think Pakistan sees this thing where it's quite opposite to what's happening in the world. In the world, like if you see in Lebanon or Yemen or areas of conflict, there's a social magnification of the issue, but there's no political attention or magnification, right? There's
Yeah.
no legislation that's taken out. In Pakistan, you're seeing the opposite. There's legislations and reformations that are happening in the legal system in
Yeah.
terms of legislation and policy, but there's no social change, right?
Yeah.
So let's go to this question. Are women who take halal looked down upon? Yeah, let's talk about the stigma of those who do end up getting divorced, divorcees who are women. And the difference, talk about it a little bit, Fatima, like the difference between men who are divorced and their appeal and women who are divorced and their appeal and the stigmas associated with it.
Well, the I think the main problem is, well, mainly again the stigma. First of all, getting the divorce is probably going to be the hardest thing you're ever going to do. Like just ending up getting it is such a chore because again, like the lawyers are going to try to convince you not to do it while it's happening, while it's in the process. Your life might be put at risk at some point
Right,
by either some by either side of the family. It could happen from either side. And for the man, it's not really that bad because it's kind of seen as it's probably the woman's fault, right? She probably wants something, she's probably asking for too much. For the man, he can just cover it up as, yeah, it was her fault. But even if it was a domestic abuse case where for her own safety, for her own life, she had to get out of the marriage, it's not going to be taken into account at all. It's going to be like, you could have dealt with it. It's okay. Like, it's not a big deal. And this is also seen in a lot of families where the women suddenly start opening up, where they're like, oh, yeah, my husband beats me all the time. And it's like, okay, but you're not supposed to be okay with that. Like, that's not okay. Are you okay? And it's honestly a really scary thing to be a part of. I think getting a divorce is for a woman something really scary, because even if you are getting yourself out of a marriage that you need out of, the social consequences of that are so huge. I've even heard of certain cases where women lose their jobs because they've gotten divorced. And I mean, the whole custody is a whole other game. But
right.
fortunately, we've seen that usually the mother does end up getting custody, but there are a lot of cases where they don't. And it's honestly heartbreaking to see, because this is a child that they've given birth to and raised. And if it's in a typical Pakistani setting, she's probably given years of her life to this child and dedicated like everything. And the end of the day, she doesn't get to keep them. That's pretty horrific in my opinion. And yeah, I mean, just if you consider it, even you talk to it about it like to someone, you're like, hey, having issues, considering a divorce, there's gonna be this whole hoo-ha, like, oh my god, that's not an option, how dare you even think that. And if a guy thinks it, they're like, oh, go ahead, you can like just get another one,
Right.
like a replacement. But a divorced woman is gonna have the hardest time ever to get married again, just because she has been divorced. So they're gonna be like, oh, maybe there's something wrong with her.
Talk about Indian matchmaking. You remember that one girl who was who already had a divorce?
Yeah.
And then she was just like, "Oh, you're gonna have to make a lot of compromises." I'm sorry for those of you who haven't watched Indian matchmaking, but watch it. Go watch it. But there's a sad woman who gets a divorce, and Seema Tapari, I don't remember what her name is, but Seema auntie, who is a Rishta auntie, goes like, listen, beta, you're going to have to make compromises. You're going to have to change, your choices. You're going to have to settle for less. And it's just like, I'm sure men have some sort of conversation like that too. But a man who is divorced, I'm sure, is more appealing than a woman who is, a divorcee. And women who are divorced are also often vilified. I remember as a young child, and now I notice it in retrospect, a lot of the aunties that were divorcees in my school growing up, private schools, they're often very vilified. And I had a very negative image of them because a lot of women wouldn't be friends with them, or they wouldn't associate with them. They wouldn't be in the mom group. So it's like, really, now in retrospect, I realize, those are all the social consequences of going through with that decision that might honestly be to save your life. Yeah, but that's crazy to me. I wanted to, are there any last, parting words that you want to say?
Don't stress about marriage. If it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen. If you don't get married, it's fine. Just get a cat and maybe a dog. You'll be fine. They'll love you just as much.
Right. Do you want to shout your socials? I mean, it's right there, but if you want to go for it, Fatma makes amazing content. She talks about a lot of things pertaining women, but in a very lighthearted and fun and engaging manner. So definitely check her out. Her Instagram is right there, fs.chuktai. But something I just wanted to say before we go is that a comment I received or have received a few ever since I started this is like, you're very anti-Pakistan and Pakistani. And something I want to say is like having this conversation. No, you're good. I had the same response. Because I personally consider myself as a very patriotic person, and for Fatima too, for someone who is going into the field of law as a female, and I'm sure she's aware of the obstacles in her path and still continues to thrive. That's at the complete opposite of anti-Pakistani. And us being critical of Pakistan or critiquing our country is rather pro-Pakistani than anti-Pakistani. Because I personally made these critiques, and I have this discussion because I want reformation in the country, and I want people to be aware of, the breaks in our society and the flaws in our society, and reform and improve and develop as a country, rather than just give ourselves like ego boosts, like we're perfect, nobody can touch us, we have some but we're fine, we're great as country. We're not, but it doesn't mean that we can't become better. We can. And that's why we're here talking to you about it, because we are privileged enough, mashallah, to have the opportunity to be aware of the flaws in our society, and together Pakistan. But yeah, thank you for joining us, Fatima. It was really great
for having me.
For sure. It was really great talking to you, and thank you for such an informative and interesting discourse. But yeah, that's it, guys.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.